Hi there, Professor Jared Rathel here. Next, we're going to explore plant tissues, organs, and organ systems. So this is the Rafflesia flower. It rivals that of the Titan arum in its size, but this corpse flower, weighing up to 22 pounds, a flower that weighs 22 pounds, not only smells of rotten flesh, but it actually mimics it in its appearance. So, unlike animals, which have 10 organ systems, which we'll be exploring in the next lesson, plants are easy in that they have just two organ systems: the root organ system below the ground and the shoot organ system above the ground. Similarly, there are three basic organs in plants: the roots, the stems, and the leaves. So you're probably thinking to yourself, nice, this is going to be a short Raythel lecture. So the tricky part about plant organs is the countless ways in which plants can modify these three basic organs to carry out a whole array of diverse functions. So we're going to start from the bottom up with the roots, like you see here at the famous temple Angkor Wat in Cambodia. There are two main types of root systems: tap roots, like we see in species like dandelions on your left, as well as fibrous root systems, like we see in the grasses on your right. The tap root, whether in a dandelion or a massive live oak, are going to provide the plant with structural support, preventing it from toppling over and also making those dandelion weeds hard to pull out of the ground. The lateral roots are lined with microscopic root hairs. So this is how the plants, using these root hairs, are going to absorb the minerals and water that they need. These root hairs have very high surface area to volume ratio, which facilitates this exchange. Animals, of course, operate in the same world as plants, subject to the same laws of physics. Thus, we also see high surface area to volume ratios in several organ systems in animals, organ systems that are evolved to exchange materials, like the circulatory system, which have these tiny vessels called capillaries with walls that are just one cell thick to facilitate gas exchange, as well as in the digestive system. So our long, small intestine is lined with millions of these little protrusions that look kind of like root hairs that are going to facilitate the absorption of nutrients. Certain species of plants, like the legumes, the beans and alfalfa, long ago entered into a mutualistic relationship with the mycorrhizal fungi. The little spheres that you see in the picture here, those are the mycorrhizal fungus. So the fungus benefits from this relationship. It gets fed glucose produced by photosynthesis in the plant. In exchange, the plant is going to receive minerals, particularly nitrogen, in a form that it can use. The fungus are able to fix that nitrogen by housing nitrogen fixing bacteria in a relationship, an interspecific relationship known as mutualism, where both species benefit. And we'll get into those in our next unit in ecology. Storage roots, like beets and carrots, do just what their name implies. They're going to store energy for the plant. often throughout some period of dormancy, like winter time or following a drought. This energy stored is then available to jumpstart growth when conditions are again favorable for plants to regrow photosynthetic tissue. So the carrot is a chemical storehouse of water, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Be sure and eat your carrots. Pneumatophores are modified roots that are used to facilitate gas exchange. So we see pneumatophores in the mangrove forests. It's really something cool to see. In these mangrove forests, the brown water is very rich in organic material, but it's also very oxygen poor. Plant roots need oxygen in order to do cellular respiration. They have to burn glucose in the presence of oxygen in order to acquire ATP for all of their physiological processes. So these pneumatophores, these modified roots, are lined with microscopic pores that are going to allow oxygen in and then funnel oxygen down to the mangrove roots living in the anaerobic water. Aerial roots aid fast-growing plants like strangler figs. It allows them to climb these massive host trees and reach the top of the canopy to get at sunlight, which is really a precious commodity. It's difficult to get on the forest floor in a tropical rainforest. When the strangler fig leafs out the host tree, blocks that host tree from the sun, the host tree is going to starve to death. It dies and then eventually it decays, and you're left with this incredible lattice work of strangler fig, which I have to admit, these are super fun to climb. So, in summary, roots can be modified to perform a whole host of functions. They anchor plants, like the taproots in dandelions. They absorb water and minerals using root hairs, and some plants are going to house mycorrhizal fungus. They store carbohydrates, like our carrots. They can be sites of gas exchange, like the pneumatophores, and they can even be modified to strangle, like in our strangler figs. Okay, so now we're going to move on to stems and the myriad of ways that stems too can be modified. The primary function of stems is to elongate and then orient the leaves to maximize photosynthesis. Let me show you what I mean by stems orienting leaves. You didn't know your tomato plants were dancing throughout the day, huh? So stems are demarcated by nodes. This is this junction right here. And then in between the nodes, we find what are called the internodes. The tips of stems house the apical buds. You recall from the last lecture that the apical buds house the meristems, undifferentiated tissue. And then the axillary buds are found on the sides. So if one was to prune away one of these stems, this axillary bud provides the stem cells to grow a new stem. So like roots, stems can be modified to perform a variety of different functions. Rhizomes are below ground subterranean stems. Notice that they're not green, they don't have any chloroplasts, they're not doing photosynthesis. Rhizomes are used by plants to spread out laterally to seek out and acquire new space, new resources. The ginger root is technically not even a root. It should be called the ginger stem. So ginger sends out rhizomes. And ginger is actually really good at very quickly spreading throughout tropical environments like the Hawaiian Islands. But again, the rhizomes are the subterranean stems for lateral growth. Stolons, similar in function, these are going to be above ground stems that are used to promote lateral growth, outward expansion in the plant. So these stolons are helping this strawberry plant spread out. And more stolons helping the common house plant, the spider plant, spread out laterally beyond its pot. Like roots, stems can also be modified to store energy in the form of carbohydrates. Storage stems are called tubers. So the potatoes that we all love to snarf up are not roots, they're actually modified stems known as tubers. Okay, so next we're going to look at nature's solar panels, leaves. Leaves, at least on most plants, are the primary photosynthetic organ. Leaves are rich in chloroplasts. They are the site of photosynthesis. If we zoom in on a leaf, we find that structurally it is ideally suited for absorbing solar radiation as well as for gas exchange. If we zoom in even further, we find that leaves are lined with thousands of tiny pores. These individual microscopic pores are called stoma. The stomata, which is the plural of stoma, are going to be opened by guard cells that swell with osmotic pressure and bow open. And then they close again when they become flaccid. Of course, you remember that photosynthesis requires that leaves take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then release the waste product, oxygen. When the stomata are open, plants are going to get this CO2 that they need, but they're also going to lose copious amounts of water in the process of transpiration. Desert plants, like we see all around us, have adapted a whole host of ways to minimize the water loss through transpiration. So they have fewer stomata, they position the stomata on the underside of the leaf. Some plants are only going to open up their stomata at night, and then they're going to store that carbon to do photosynthesis during the day. So you're going to explore some of the adaptations in xeric, X-E-R-I-C, xeric or desert plants in your outdoor desert plant photography portfolio. It's an outdoor lab, get you outside, taking some pictures, enjoying the amazing plants that we have here. I hope it's one that you enjoy. Also, in your video materials section in this lesson in Canvas, I ask that you check out the very short video after you finish with this lecture. It's about transpiration in very large trees, entitled How Trees Bend the Laws of Physics. It's truly remarkable how trees like the baobab or the redwoods are going to get water hundreds of feet up into the air. Okay, so the photosynthetic surface of a leaf is here. We call it the blade. And then the stem that is going to elongate and orient that blade is called the petiole. Like roots and stems, probably shouldn't surprise you, leaves can also be modified to perform a variety of different tasks. Tendrils are modified leaves that give fast-growing plants structural support by locating and clinging to rigid objects in their environment, like these beans that are using their tendrils to cling to and support them on trellises. So in the Cactaceae, the cactus family, whom I'm sure you guys are all very familiar with, the Cactaceae is actually a really unique family that's endemic to the Western Hemisphere. But in the Cactaceae, the stems have become the primary photosynthetic organs. You can see that the chlorophyll is now all in the stems, and the leaves have been modified into protective spines. So the spines evolved to guard this lineage of plants from herbivores, things like hungry bison and antelope and javelina. So like roots and stems, leaves can also be modified to store carbohydrates for future growth, like we see in this purple onion. Lastly, leaves can be the site of asexual reproduction, like we see in these little plantlets circled in red. So these are genetic clones of their parent. So these are the structures that we've discussed so far and that are very likely to show up on your next assessment. Wink, wink. So leaves, stems, and roots are comprised of three primary tissue types in plants. The dermal tissue, shown in light blue cross sections of the root, the stem, and the leaf, is going to be the outermost layer of tissue always. The vascular tissue is indicated by purple in the three cross sections, and then we have the ground tissue, which is yellow in this diagram. So the dermal tissue is the outermost protective coating. It's going to protect the plant from external stressors like pathogens, as well as minimize water loss. Here in the desert, our cactus and our succulents, they're characterized by that waxy feel. That's the thick, waxy cuticle circled here in red that's going to prevent the water loss from the epidermis. The primary function of the vascular tissue in plants, just as in animals, is the transportation of materials. Two important structures that you need to be familiar with in plants are the xylem, which starts with an X, and the phloem. So the xylem is going to conduct water in one direction from the roots upwards to the shoots to the leaves, and then remember it passes through the stomata and is lost to the plant in the process of transpiration. So again, be sure and check out that video on transpiration in large trees that's in your video materials. But it's truly amazing how these massive trees do it. They create this incredible, tremendous negative pressure to move this water upwards without expending any energy. The phloem down below there is going to transport glucose from the leaves in multiple directions to cells where it is needed in order to do cellular respiration and gain ATP. And then finally, we have the ground tissue known as the pith and the cortex. The pith is the internal tissue. You can see it here, this spongy internal tissue. It's located internal of the vascular bundles, which are in purple. The cortex is the ground tissue that's located external of those vascular bundles. Okay, so be sure and tune in to my final lecture in this lesson, I promise, where we're going to take a closer look at the diversity and the structures in the most derived lineage of plants in the angiosperms. Thanks for your time.